Hello and welcome to the first video in my series discussing what I think are the most important concepts from the book Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell. I bought this book because I had heard it does the best job at introducing something as complex as the economy, and it breaks it down into bite-sized pieces that are fairly comprehensible. I read the Kindle edition of the book. It is a pretty lengthy book. The print edition, I believe, is over 700 pages. Gotta take this info in like a fine wine. This video and the subsequent videos in this series on basic economics will detail my own reflections and the lessons that I've learned, and I hope that these in some way provide further value to you. So grab some wine and let's get down to business. The book is divided into 7 parts, and this video is going to go over part 1. I have notes on all 7 parts. I don't know if I'm going to end up combining some of these sections or not, because some of the parts of the book were shorter than others. So I'll see how I handle that moving forward. But for today, what I'm going to do is read you my notes and try and provide additional commentary to help explain things in more detail. But just know that the format of this video, it's not going to be like a story. There are no transitions. I do try to put transitions in where I can to make more sense of things and keep the flow going, but these are more like bullet point notes in each part of the book. So here we go. Main points of Part 1 of Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell, and Part 1 is about prices and markets. Economics is the study of the allocation of scarce resources that have alternative uses. This is mentioned throughout the book in every single part, like 50,000 times. The main point that he wants you to gather, if you get anything out of this book or this video, is that economics is the study of the allocation of scarce resources that have alternative uses. A free market economy regulated by prices, also known as capitalism, is so far the most efficient economy ever devised. It allows individuals, which make up the market, to decide which products and businesses are successes or failures. Prices are determined so that producers get their money back and make a profit. If an item is overpriced, the market will tell you by not buying that product. If an item is appropriately priced or underpriced and meets a demand of consumers, it'll be purchased. Now, failures are just as important as successes. Companies or products that fail tell producers what not to do. This makes the economy more efficient for consumers. In a free market, businesses are always trying to compete for consumers. They're trying to make products that you are going to want to buy. So when a business creates a product that you don't want to buy, that is valuable information for that business and all other businesses who are looking to create similar products. So successes and failures in business in a free market, they're both important. An economy that is centrally planned is not as efficient as a free market economy. There are too many products to track and too few people to track them. Even from a humanitarian perspective, it's often the greedy producers who rush to help those in need so they can make a profit, rather than a representative from a central planning body. The incentives are much greater for the producers who are out to make a profit because they have what Nassim Taleb calls skin in the game. If I remember correctly in the book, Sowell details the evidence for this in the response to Hurricane Katrina. There was the response from the government and FEMA, and then there was the response from the private sector. People like to make fun of the government in their response to Hurricane Katrina because it was so slow. Efficiency was very low at getting resources to the people who need it, but those in the private sector who were doing the same thing were able to get them those resources much more quickly. Because why? Money. They're going after the money, and to get your money, they need to provide you the best service possible. Point number 3 from part 1. There is no fixed value on anything. For example, one house could be sold many times for a different price each time. The value of things goes up and down in relation to many factors. This is a point about basic supply and demand. Point number 4. Needs. Everybody's got needs these days. Politicians say people need this, people need that. Politicians are often more liked than economists because they tell people what they want to hear, while economists try to explain the long-term benefits and consequences of political and monetary policies.
That's boring.
And way less exciting. For example, the United States has a budget. If it wants to buy something that it currently doesn't have, it either has to raise capital, also known as taxes, or allocate funds it already has somewhere else. Now, people disagree on where these funds should be allocated. Economists can analyze the historical placement of said funds to inform politicians what will happen if they do decide to move the money. Economics influences everything. Why? Because Things cost money. When we see presidential candidates debating on political issues, a lot of things is really a debate on how to spend the money we already have. People argue whether it should go towards healthcare or military or education, infrastructure, etc. But it's always a debate on, with the money you have, where should it go? Point number 5. If you owned any kind of asset like real estate and the government put a limit on the rent you could charge, would you be inclined to buy a rental property? How about this? Let's say the government only capped rents in select areas where people have a hard time affording rent, but in other areas there were no rent limits. Which of those areas, as an investor, would you choose to invest? This scenario brings us to Sowell's argument on the unintended consequences of affordable housing. When rent control laws are enacted, it disincentivizes private builders to erect new apartment buildings if those buildings are going to be subject to rent control laws. If new construction is not subject to those laws, then investors will be disincentivized from buying existing apartment buildings that do fall under the law. If new construction is not subject to government restrictions and there is consumer demand for new housing, then it would be reasonable to see new housing pop up. If there's no regulation on new construction, but there is regulation on buildings that are existing, then you'll see people disincentivized from buying existing buildings because they don't want to purchase an asset that has a capped income. So long as it's the goal of an investor to make the most profit from their investments, they're not going to be as inclined to buy assets that can't produce much income due to government regulation. Sowell makes the point in his book that this has led to building owners abandoning their buildings in cities like New York because they can't charge enough rent because of the regulation on rent to cover the cost of the building and make a profit. Apartment buildings in major cities that have been abandoned are converted to condos or office space. Since these buildings are abandoned at a more frequent rate, and private builders are more willing to build if their properties are exempt from the government regulation, the amount of rent-controlled housing is actually scarce. This scarcity affects the level of upkeep on these buildings, as most of them are neglected since the inventory is low enough that almost all of the rent-controlled buildings are full. So put another way, landlords managing rent-controlled buildings could care less about maintenance because they know that they have a scarce resource, and this scarce resource is an apartment at a very low cost. And demand for housing at a low cost is very high. So since the costs of upkeep eat more into the profits than a privately run complex, many owners neglect to maintain their buildings. Point number 6, price controls and subsidies. Let's say there's a dairy farmer, a good old dairy farmer who's selling milk. He sells the milk at $3.50 a gallon. The economy takes a turn, farmers are feeling the hurt. In an effort to lessen the blow of the economic downturn to farmers, the government steps in and says, hey now, if the price of milk drops below $2 a gallon, we'll buy it. All right, goes lower than that, we got you covered. That way, the farmers don't lose as much money. But here's the situation that the government has produced. Dairy farmers now produce products that have no chance of not selling. Everything they produce will be either purchased by you, the consumer, at an inflated price, or the government at a much lower price. So knowing that every product you make is going to be sold, what are dairy farmers going to do with that information? As a dairy farmer, we're going to make dairy until our hands bleed. That's exactly right. Excellent answer. Now, one problem is that the amount of consumers who purchase milk have not gone up. There aren't thousands of people who woke up the next day and decided, you know what, I'm going to get some 2% milk. So now we have more milk being produced, but the same amount of milk, what do I do with my hands? More milk being produced, but the same amount of milk being consumed. So where does that surplus go? The government buys it at less than $2 a gallon.
Well, isn't that special?
Now, an important question would be, gee, what does the government do with this surplus of milk? Do they dye it orange and have Nickelodeon slime parties? Do they hand it out to the poor for free? No, sadly, it gets stored or destroyed. And since the government pays to store the milk, you pay to store the milk. So now you pay higher prices for milk, right? Because all of the milk that is losing value by staying on the shelves that's going below $2 a gallon is being purchased by the government. So you have no choice but to buy milk at higher than $2 a gallon. But not only are you being forced to buy it at the higher price while the government buys it at the lower price, you also are paying to store the milk that the government is buying. Because remember, the people who need to purchase milk have already purchased their milk at the higher price. So there's no market for this surplus of milk. And if it's stored, milk only lasts so long before it goes bad. And in the end, farmers do get their money, but At what cost, right? That's a good question.
That's where economics comes in.
And if you remember from earlier, as we discussed, say it with me. Let's do it together. Economics analyzes the allocation of scarce resources with alternative uses. Now, milk has quite a bit of alternative uses. It's found in many things like ice cream and a Starbucks coffee. So if the price of milk goes up, guess what? Well, you guessed it. The price of ice cream and coffee go up. So all the things that milk is in, you're going to see price increases for those products. Now what remains is a farming industry bolstered by government subsidies, unwilling to sever the tie between their profits and public funding. And why would they, honestly? They make much more money selling dairy at artificially high prices. Sowell states that about 10% of the US farming industry is subsidized by the federal government. Sowell also notes that the government subsidizes sugar farms. Now, tropical climates south of the United States are able to grow sugar much more efficiently because the climate's well suited for it. Consequently, the sugar costs more in the United States than it does from these tropical climates. Sugar could be purchased for far less money from the world market than if we continue to buy it from our domestic farmers. But as long as the government pays people to grow it, there's going to be farmers that grow it. And the seventh and final point in this first part of basic economics is prices regulate resources more efficiently than fiat. Now, fiat, spelled F-I-A-T, is a type of regulation. So let's say there's a disaster, like, I don't know, some sort of pandemic that takes the world by storm for like 2 years. People might think that they don't have any incentive to leave their home out of fear of getting sick. So they stock up on essential things like toilet paper, obviously. After a while, there's a shortage of toilet paper. In an effort to keep everyone's asses clean, the store dictates through fiat that you can only purchase 2 things of toilet paper at a time. But then what happens? You turn on the news and you see that, oh my God, the shelves are bare. There's nothing there. There's no toilet paper. They've purchased it all. So you scramble. You leave your home. You go on social media. You go on Facebook. You get your boots on the ground. You get your ear to the ground. You go out there and you find where there is still a roll of toilet paper to be purchased. And when you find the store that has it, what do? You take 5 of them and you sneak out through the self-checkout line. Now, Sowell says that rather than regulate toilet paper through fiat, fluctuating prices will do this way more efficiently. To use an extreme example, people will be much more deterred from buying toilet paper in bulk if the price of just one package is $50 rather than $20. What's it gonna be? All right, $50. Money for gas, money for your ass. Make a decision. So that covers the main points that I discerned from the first part of basic economics, prices, and markets. If this video provided any value to you at all, please hit the like button. And what I would love to know is if you could comment and let me know if the way I explain things actually made sense. That would be great. And I'll be working on the second part of the series on basic economics here shortly. And so if you want to see more of that, subscribe to the channel and you'll get notified for when that's out. But for now, thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time.